If someone had told me 5 years ago that the woman serving me homemade apple pie at Thanksgiving was quietly stealing my family's entire legacy, I would have laughed so hard I'd spill my coffee. She called me sweetheart. She hugged me every Christmas. She cried at my wedding. She told everyone I was the daughter she never had. What a joke. The truth? She didn't want a daughter. She wanted an empire. And my father's company was worth over $40 million. Welcome back to Inspired Real Events, where ordinary people meet impossible family and the quiet ones learn the loudest lessons. If betrayal, gratitude, and slow burn justice are your thing, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Madison Hayes. I'm 35 years old, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. For most of my life, I believed that hard work solved everything. My father taught me that. He started Hayes Industrial Supply from a tiny warehouse with one used pickup truck, a folding desk, and a dream so stubborn it refused to die. People love saying, if something looks perfect from the outside, it probably isn't. I hate that saying, because sometimes you really believe you're living the dream. 35, I thought I had everything I'd worked for. A beautiful home just outside Denver, a husband who seemed dependable, a career I genuinely loved, and the privilege of working alongside my father every single day. Every morning started the same. Dad would already be in his office by 6:30 with black coffee that could probably remove paint from a wall. Morning, Maddie, he'd call before I even reached my desk. Morning, Dad, he'd grin without looking up. You beat traffic. Barely. Haha, then you're improving. Those little conversations felt ordinary back then. Now I'd give anything to hear one more. Hayes Industrial Supply wasn't glamorous. We didn't make headlines. We weren't some flashy Silicon Valley startup with beanbag chairs and kombucha on tap. We sold industrial equipment, steel components, safety materials, and construction supplies. It was honest work. The kind that kept hospitals, schools, highways, and apartment buildings going up across the West. Dad used to say, nobody notices companies like ours until they disappear. He was right. The company employed over 300 people. Some had worked there longer than I'd been alive. When I walked through the warehouse, forklift operators waved. Receptionists knew my coffee order. Drivers stopped to ask how my golden retriever, Cooper, was doing after his surgery. It felt like family, real family, not the kind connected by blood, the kind connected by loyalty, or so I believed. My husband, Ethan, had entered the business 6 years after we married. At first, I resisted. Dad resisted even more. We don't hire family just because they're family, Dad told him during the interview. I understand. You'll start at the bottom. I expected that. You'll answer to managers younger than you. No problem, Dad nodded. Good answer, looking back. I wonder if Ethan had already planned every answer before he walked through that door, because he was patient. Painfully patient. He never rushed, never argued, never demanded promotions. He simply waited, like someone planting seeds. The first few years, everyone loved him, including me. He remembered birthdays, stayed late, helped warehouse workers load trucks, brought donuts every Friday. He had this calm confidence that made people trust him almost instantly. Even Dad admitted it. He's good with people. He is. But watch people who are too good. I laughed. Dad. What? Suspicious of everybody. I'm old. You were suspicious at 40. I was right more often than wrong. I rolled my eyes. He laughed, and for a moment everything felt warm and safe. If only I had listened. Then there was Diane, my mother-in-law. She entered every room as though she'd been invited to lead it. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile. She hugged everyone, remembered names, sent birthday cards, baked pies for office parties. Employees adored her. Oh, Diane is such a sweetheart. She's so generous. I wish my mother-in-law were like that. I smiled every time I heard it. I believed it too. She never officially worked for Hayes Industrial Supply. She didn't have an office, no title, no business cards, but somehow she was always there. Board lunches, holiday events, charity fundraisers, client dinners. She always had a reason. Oh, Ethan invited me. I was just dropping something off. I happened to be nearby. It seemed harmless. Dad noticed before I did. Funny, what? I see Diane here more than some executives, I shrugged. She's friendly. That was Dad's favorite word when he didn't want to start an argument. Looking back, that tiny word carried more warning than I ever realized. One rainy Tuesday changed everything, although none of us knew it yet. I walked into the executive conference room carrying quarterly reports. The meeting hadn't started, but everyone was already there. Everyone except me. The room fell strangely quiet. Conversations stopped. A few people smiled too quickly. Someone closed a laptop the instant I entered. Weird, really weird. I ignored it. Dad walked in seconds later. "Morning, everyone." No one answered as enthusiastically as usual. He noticed. I saw it in his eyes. The meeting continued normally. Sales were strong. Expansion looked promising. Profits exceeded projections. By every measurable standard, Hayes' industrial supply had never been healthier. Yet Dad looked uneasy. After everyone left, he closed the conference room door. "Madison, yeah. Has anything felt off lately?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He stared through the glass wall toward the hallway. "I don't know." Silence. Then quietly, "I've built companies." "Yes, I've also watched companies get stolen." A chill crawled across my skin. "What are you talking about?" He looked at me for several seconds before forcing a smile. "Probably nothing." "Dad, I hope I'm wrong." I wish. I wish he had told me everything he suspected that day, because 3 months later, my father collapsed in his office, and before the ambulance even reached the hospital, someone else had already started taking control of everything he built. The morning my father was admitted to the hospital, I kept telling myself it wasn't as serious as it looked. "Dad's stubborn," I whispered to Ethan as we hurried through the automatic doors of St. Mary's Medical Center. "He probably argued with the paramedics the whole ride over." Ethan squeezed my hand. "Knowing Frank, he probably told them they were driving too slow." A weak laugh escaped me. It felt good for half a second. Then it disappeared. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Nurses moved quickly from room to room, phones rang without stopping, and somewhere down the hall, a child was crying. The world kept moving while mine had suddenly stopped. I found Dad's physician speaking with another nurse. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Madison Hayes. Frank Hayes is my father." The doctor's expression softened. "Mr. Hayes is stable." Stable. That word felt like a life raft. "He suffered a serious cardiac episode. We were able to stabilize him quickly, but he'll need surgery." "Surgery," he nodded. "The next 24 hours are critical." Critical. Another word that hit like a punch. I thanked him, though I barely remember doing it. As soon as he walked away, my knees buckled. Ethan caught me before I hit the floor. "I've got you," he whispered. At that moment, I believed him. I really did. Dad hated hospitals. The moment he woke up, the first thing he complained about wasn't the pain, it was the food. "They're trying to kill me with mashed potatoes." I laughed through tears. "Dad, you almost had a heart attack." "I did have one." "You still have jokes." "If I stop joking, then you should worry." I reached over and held his hand. It looked different, older. The hands that had built warehouses, signed contracts, fixed machinery, and taught me how to swing a hammer suddenly seemed fragile. That scared me more than anything. He watched me carefully. "You're crying." "I'm not. You've always been a terrible liar." A tear rolled down my cheek. He smiled. "There she is." I laughed again, but it cracked halfway through. "Oh, Dad." He squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "You'll be okay." "I should be saying that to you." "No." His eyes grew serious. "You need to listen." I leaned closer. "If anything ever happens to me." "Don't." "Madison, no." His voice became firm. "Listen," I nodded. "There are people around the company you trust." "Of course." "Don't." "What?" "Trust." I blinked. "I don't understand." He looked toward the door, lowered his voice. "People change when money gets involved." I frowned. "Who?" He hesitated, for the first time in my life. My father looked afraid, not scared of dying, scared of something else. "I'll explain after surgery." "You promise?" "I promise." Those were the last clear words he ever spoke to me. Over the next week, visitors poured into the hospital. Employees, friends, suppliers, neighbors, church members. Everyone wanted to see Frank Hayes. Flowers filled the room. Cards covered every table. The nurses joked that Dad was their most popular patient. One visitor never missed a day. Diane, always carrying homemade soup, always smiling, always speaking softly. "Oh, Frank," she'd say, fluffing his pillow. "Everyone misses you." She looked like kindness wrapped in a cashmere sweater. The nurses loved her. Even other patients smiled when she walked by. One afternoon, I returned from grabbing coffee and found Diane sitting beside Dad alone. The conversation stopped the moment I entered. "Oh." Diane said brightly. "There you are." Dad wasn't smiling. His eyes stayed fixed on the window. Everything suddenly felt wrong. "What were you two talking about?" I asked. "Oh, nothing important," she smiled. "Just old stories." Dad looked at me for half a second, then looked away. It was the only time in my life my father avoided my eyes. Meanwhile, Ethan practically moved into the office. "Someone has to keep things running," he told me. "I know. I'll handle everything." "Thank you." "You stay with your dad." I kissed him. I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words still make me sick, because while I sat beside my father's hospital bed, someone else was sitting in his chair. The first thing I noticed wasn't dramatic, it was little things. A new executive assistant, different security guards, meetings being rescheduled, departments reorganized. None of it seemed important until Karen called. Karen Miller had worked for Dad for 28 years. She'd started as a receptionist before I was born. She knew every employee's birthday, every supplier's anniversary, every secret. If Hayes Industrial Supply had a heartbeat, Karen was it. Her voice sounded nervous. "Madison, hi Karen, how's your dad? Recovering. I'm glad." Silence. "Karen, I don't know if I should say anything." My stomach tightened. "What happened? It's probably nothing." "Karen," another pause. "There've been a lot of changes." "What kind of changes?" "Ethan's been holding executive meetings." "So, Diane's been attending." I laughed. "She probably brought lunch." "No," Karen whispered. "She's speaking." "What do you mean?" "Like," Karen hesitated, "like she's giving directions." I frowned. "She doesn't even work here." "I know, maybe you're misunderstanding." "I hope so." Something in her voice lingered long after we hung up. 3 days later, I finally returned to the office. Everything looked normal. The same parking lot, the same brick building. The same company logo Dad had designed on a napkin 30 years earlier, but walking inside, something had changed. People smiled, yet their smiles looked forced. Conversations stopped as I walked past. Warehouse employees suddenly became very interested in their clipboards. Even the receptionist hesitated before greeting me. "Morning, Madison." "Morning." Her smile disappeared almost instantly. Weird, again, really weird. I headed upstairs. Dad's office door was closed. I reached for the handle. Locked. That had never happened. Karen appeared behind me. "Madison, why is Dad's office locked?" She swallowed. "Ethan changed the locks." I stared at her. "What?" He said sensitive documents needed protection. "My father owns this company." "I know, I'm his daughter." "I know." "Then unlock it." Karen looked like she wanted to disappear. She glanced toward the hallway. "I don't have a key anymore." "What?" "Ethan collected everyone's keys." A cold sensation crept up my spine. Just then, the office door opened. Ethan stepped out smiling. "There you are." He kissed my forehead. "How's Frank?" "Dad, what?" "You used his first name." "Oh," he chuckled. "Sorry, it was such a tiny thing, but Dad hated people calling him Frank unless they'd known him for decades. Ethan knew that, he always knew that, yet somehow, he'd stopped caring. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of someone sitting inside Dad's office. Perfect blonde hair, cream-colored blazer, pearl earrings. Diane. She looked up, smiled warmly. "Oh, sweetheart." Sweetheart. She'd never called me Madison anymore. Always sweetheart. Always darling. Always honey. The kind of words that sound loving until you realize they're replacing your name. "I was just helping Ethan organize a few files." "In my father's office." She laughed lightly. "Oh, don't make it sound so dramatic." Dramatic. Another word that suddenly felt poisonous. Ethan wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "We're just keeping things together until your dad gets back." I nodded slowly. Maybe they were. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief was making me paranoid. I wanted to believe that. I desperately wanted to believe that. That evening, I visited Dad again. He looked exhausted. His surgery had been successful, but recovery was slower than anyone expected. He motioned for me to come closer. "Office. It's fine." "You sure?" "Everything's under control." His eyes searched mine. "Ethan." "Working hard." "Deanne." The question surprised me. "What about her?" He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, there was disappointment in them, not at me, at himself. "I waited too long." "What?" He shook his head. "I should've." The heart monitor suddenly began beeping faster. A nurse rushed in. "Mr. Hayes, you need to stay calm." Dad tried to speak again. His voice barely came out. "Desk." "What?" "Bottom." The nurse gently moved me aside. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes. We need some space." I stood in the hallway watching doctors surround my father. His lips kept moving. He was trying to tell me something important, something about a desk, the bottom drawer, bottom shelf, bottom file. I couldn't hear him. I couldn't get close enough. And by the time the doctors stabilized him again, he had slipped into a medically induced sleep. He never finished the sentence. As I left the hospital that night, my phone buzzed. It was a company-wide email. From Ethan Collins, acting executive director. Acting? I stopped walking. My father had never appointed an acting executive director. He hadn't even discussed it with me. I opened the email. "Effective immediately, all executive decisions will be routed through my office until further notice. Thank you for your continued cooperation during this transition." Transition. The word echoed in my head. My father wasn't dead. He was still fighting. So why did that email sound like someone had already decided he wasn't coming back? I stood alone in the hospital parking lot, staring at the glowing screen as a summer storm rolled across the Denver sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing outside my own family, looking in through the window. And I had no idea the people inside had already started locking the doors behind me. The call came at 4:17 on a Thursday morning. Not a text, not a voicemail. Phone call, the kind that makes your heart sink before you even answer. I stared at my phone as it vibrated across the nightstand. St. Mary's Medical Center. My hands started shaking. No, I whispered it before I even picked up. No, no, no. Hello, Ms. Hayes, yes. This is Dr. Michael Reynolds. His voice was calm, too calm. I'm afraid your father experienced complications during the night. The room spun. Is he? Silence. 1 second, 2, 3. I'm very sorry. That was all I heard. Everything else disappeared into static. I don't remember getting dressed. I don't remember driving. Later, I found out I'd driven nearly 20 miles without turning on the radio, without noticing a single traffic light, without crying. Shock is strange. It protects you until it can't anymore. When I reached the hospital, Karen was already waiting outside the room. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. Oh, Maddie. She had called me Maddie since I was 6 years old, the way she said it. I knew. I walked into the room. Dad looked peaceful, too peaceful. The machines had been turned off. The room was silent. No beeping, no nurses, no doctors, just stillness. I walked over slowly. His coffee mug was still sitting on the windowsill, half full. Cold. Yesterday he'd complained that hospital coffee tasted like dirty rainwater. Now, he'd never complain again. Dad, my voice cracked. I touched his hand. It was already cold. No, a laugh escaped me. Not because anything was funny, because my brain refused to believe this was happening. Ha ha ha. It sounded broken, completely broken. You promised. The tears finally came, not quietly, not gracefully. They hit like a flood. I wasn't ready. My knees gave out. I buried my face against the blanket. I'm still your little girl. The words came out between sobs. You said we'd fix the company together. Every memory came rushing back, teaching me to ride a bike, helping with 5th-grade science projects, my first broken heart, the day Mom died. He'd held everything together. Now. There was nobody left holding me. The funeral took place 5 days later. More than 500 people came. Construction workers wearing dusty boots, executives in tailored suits, truck drivers, warehouse crews, old neighbors, former employees who had retired years ago. Dad had touched lives I never even knew about. One by one, they approached me. Your father gave me my first job. He paid for my daughter's college. He kept my health insurance after I got sick. He never wanted anyone to know. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like him. He never believed generosity should come with applause. Ethan stayed glued to my side, holding my hand, greeting guests, speaking to reporters, helping organize everything. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was. Your husband has been incredible. He's holding everything together. He's exactly what Frank would have wanted. I nodded every time. If only they knew. Then Diane stood to give a eulogy. I hadn't expected it. Neither had anyone else. She walked to the podium wearing black silk and pearls. Perfect. Composed. She dabbed her eyes with a white handkerchief. I wasn't born into the Hayes family. Her voice trembled just enough. But Frank always treated me like one of his own. People nodded. He trusted people. Another pause. He taught us that businesses aren't built with money. She smiled sadly. They're built with family. Family. She repeated that word 6 times. I counted. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Now I know it was something else. A message, a claim, a declaration, almost as if she were introducing herself as the next guardian of Dad's legacy. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded. I did too. God, I wish I hadn't. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday. Dad's attorney, Richard Lawson, had handled our family's legal work for nearly 25 years. He'd watched me grow up. He taught me how trusts worked when I turned 25. He once joked that he'd probably retire before Dad did. Instead, he looked 10 years older when I entered his office. Madison! He hugged me. I'm so sorry. Thank you. His eyes avoided mine. That was the first warning. Everyone was avoiding my eyes lately. Karen, employees, now Richard. Why? The conference room slowly filled. Me, Ethan, Deanne, 3 board members, Richard, a financial advisor. Everything felt strangely formal. Too formal. Richard opened the leather folder. We're here to review the final wishes of Mr. Frank Hayes. My chest tightened. Dad had always said I would eventually become CEO, not because I was his daughter, because I'd earned it. I'd worked there since I was 16, loaded trucks during summer breaks, studied business, managed operations, negotiated contracts. Dad used to laugh and say, "One day you'll be fixing my mistakes." I smiled at the memory. Richard began reading. Several charitable donations, scholarships, employee bonuses, gifts to longtime friends, exactly what Dad would have wanted. Then came the company. I leaned forward. Richard hesitated. Actually, he stopped reading altogether. He looked at me, then at Ethan, then back down. My heartbeat became painfully loud. Pursuant to the amended corporate succession documents. Amended? What amended documents? Temporary executive authority shall remain with acting executive director Ethan Collins until the board of directors completes the succession process. I blinked. What? Richard continued. During which time all operational authority shall remain unchanged. No. The word escaped before I realized I'd spoken. No. Everyone looked at me. I've never heard of amended succession documents. Richard swallowed. They were filed 3 months ago. 3 months. Dad was already in the hospital. What are you talking about? They're legally registered. No, I stood. My father never discussed this. Richard looked miserable. Dad planned for me to become CEO. Silence. Richard. Nothing. Look at me. He finally did. His eyes were full of regret. I can't discuss legal advice. Something snapped inside me. Legal advice? I slammed both hands onto the conference table. My father spent 20 years preparing me to lead this company. Nobody answered. Or telling me that suddenly changed while he was recovering from heart surgery. Diane finally spoke. Her voice was gentle. So much has happened, sweetheart. There it is again. She blinked. What, sweetheart? I stared directly at her. My name is Madison. Her smile faltered for the first time, only for a second, then it returned. Of course. Ethan stood. Madison, maybe we should. I turned toward him. Did you know? His expression froze. Know what? About these amended documents. A tiny pause, less than a second, but I saw it. I knew your father wanted stability. You knew. I was trying to protect the company. By keeping me in the dark. That's not fair. I laughed, a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Ha ha ha. Everyone stared. You know what's funny? No one answered. My father spent his whole life teaching me that trust is the foundation of every business. I looked around the room. And today I don't know who I can trust. After the meeting ended, Karen caught up with me in the parking lot. She looked terrified. Madison, what? Don't go home yet. What? There are things you need to see. My pulse quickened. What things? She glanced around before lowering her voice. I've been making copies. Copies of what? Everything. What are you talking about? Emails. My heart skipped. Meeting notes. She swallowed. Board approvals. I stared at her. Why? Because. She looked like she was about to cry. I think your father knew something was wrong. The world seemed to stop. What did he know? I don't know. Karen. I only know that during the last 6 months. She leaned even closer. He asked me to secretly copy every document Deanne ever touched. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? He said if anything ever happened to him. Her voice broke. I was supposed to give them to you. My father's words from the hospital suddenly echoed in my mind. Desk. Bottom. The bottom drawer. He had been trying to tell me something. Karen reached into her purse, slowly, carefully. She pulled out a small brass key. It was old, worn smooth from years of use. I found this taped underneath your father's desk. My hands trembled as I took it. Attached to the key was a faded piece of masking tape. In my father's unmistakable handwriting were 5 words, for Madison. Trust no one. A chill ran through my entire body. I looked up at Karen. Neither of us spoke. Because in that single moment, we both realized the same terrifying truth. My father hadn't died believing everything was under control. He had died trying to warn me, and whatever was hidden behind that tiny brass key. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure I never found it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's handwriting. For Madison. Trust no one. 5 simple words. 5 words that completely changed the way I looked at everyone around me, especially my own husband. The brass key lay on my nightstand, catching the moonlight every few minutes as cars passed outside. I picked it up, turned it over in my fingers. It wasn't a house key. It wasn't a car key. It was small, old-fashioned. The kind of key that belonged to a lock someone wanted hidden. Dad had taped it underneath his desk, not inside a drawer, not in his safe, underneath it. Somewhere only someone looking very carefully would ever find it. He had known, somehow. My father had known someone would search his office after he was gone, and he didn't trust them. The next morning, I arrived at Hayes Industrial Supply before sunrise. The parking lot was almost empty. For years, Dad and I had always been the first two people in the building. Today, his parking space sat empty. The sight nearly broke me. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. "I miss you already." The words echoed inside the silent car. Then I wiped away my tears. Dad hadn't raised me to quit. If he'd left me a key, he expected me to use it. Karen was waiting near the employee entrance. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "You came early." "I didn't want anyone to see us." She nodded quickly. "Good." Her nervousness was contagious. "Karen." "What?" "Tell me the truth." She hesitated. "Are you afraid?" She looked toward the security cameras, then whispered, "Yes." "Of who?" "I don't know anymore." That answer frightened me more than any name could have. We entered through the side entrance instead of the lobby. Everything felt different, even the air. Warehouse workers who normally joked over coffee barely spoke. Forklifts hummed in the distance. People avoided eye contact. It felt less like a family business and more like a company under occupation. Karen leaned closer. "Security changed last week. I noticed. They replaced every overnight guard." "Who approved that?" "Ethan." My stomach tightened. "And Diane," Karen nodded once. "She interviewed them." I stopped walking. "What?" Karen immediately regretted saying it. "I wasn't supposed to tell you. My mother-in-law interviewed security guards for a company she doesn't even work for." Karen looked down. Nobody questioned it. Dad's office was still locked. Karen glanced both directions before pulling a master access card from her pocket. "I wasn't supposed to keep this." The lock clicked. The door opened. I stepped inside. For a second, I forgot why I had come. The room still smelled like Dad, fresh coffee, leather, pine aftershave, machine oil. It was the smell of my childhood. His reading glasses rested exactly where he'd left them. A half-finished legal pad sat on the desk. His favorite baseball still balanced on a shelf beside framed photographs of us fishing when I was 12. Nothing had moved, at least. Nothing obvious. I slowly walked behind his desk, ran my fingers across the polished wood. "This is where he was sitting." Karen quietly nodded. "The morning he collapsed." I closed my eyes. I could almost hear his voice. "Morning, Maddie." A lump formed in my throat. Then I remembered the key. I knelt beneath the desk. The underside still had a strip of torn masking tape where Karen had found it. Dad really had hidden it there. But what did it open? I searched every drawer. Nothing. Bookshelves, nothing. File cabinets, nothing. The wall safe, wrong key. I frowned. "This doesn't make sense." Karen stared at the desk, then suddenly whispered, "The clock." "What?" She pointed toward the old grandfather clock in the corner. Dad had inherited it from Grandpa Hayes. It had stood in this office longer than I had been alive. Never let anyone move it. Not even during renovations. I walked over, the brass lock beneath the clock face. Looked exactly the right size. My pulse quickened. I slid the key inside. Click. The front panel quietly opened. Behind the pendulum wasn't a clock mechanism. It was a hidden compartment. Oh my God! Inside sat a black leather binder, a stack of flash drives, 3 sealed envelopes, and 1 small digital voice recorder. Karen gasped. "He built a secret compartment." Dad built everything. My hands trembled as I lifted the binder. Across the front, written in thick black marker, were 3 words. If you're reading nothing else, just, if you're reading. I opened the binder. The first page made my heart stop. To my daughter, Madison, my vision blurred instantly. I blinked away tears. Dad's handwriting filled every page. "If you're reading this, then something happened before I could explain everything myself." I covered my mouth. "I pray I'm simply recovering in the hospital and you're laughing at me for being dramatic." A broken smile crossed my face. That sounded exactly like him. Then, the words became darker. "If I have died," I couldn't breathe. "Then you must assume 2 things immediately. First, someone inside this company betrayed me." I froze. "Second, that person isn't working alone." "No," I whispered. Karen stood silently beside me. I kept reading. "For the last 18 months, I've noticed irregular financial approvals, unauthorized executive meetings, confidential information leaving this office, and employees changing their loyalties for reasons that don't make sense." My heartbeat pounded inside my ears. At first, I blamed myself. Age, stress, exhaustion. Then I started following the paper trail. The next sentence nearly made me drop the binder. Every trail eventually led to one family. Family. Again that word. Again. Turned the page. There, carefully taped to the paper, was a photograph, a restaurant, private dining room. The date in the corner showed 8 months earlier. Around the table sat Ethan, 3 board members, a corporate attorney I didn't recognize, and Diane. They were raising champagne glasses, laughing, celebrating something. My stomach twisted. Dad had circled Diane's face in red ink. Below the picture he'd written, "She is not visiting the company by accident." "What is this?" Karen whispered. "I don't know," but deep inside, I was beginning to. The next envelope contained copies of internal emails. Most looked ordinary until I reached one forwarded message. From Diane Collins. I stared. Collins, she wasn't just Ethan's mother. She was using his last name in company correspondence. There was no company email account assigned to her, yet somehow she had one. The email read, "The board is almost ready. Frank still believes Madison will eventually take control. Let him believe that a little longer." I read it again and again. My hands became ice cold. The date, 9 months ago, 9 months before my father died, before he even went to the hospital, she had already been planning. Karen suddenly whispered, "Someone's coming." Footsteps outside the office, slow, heavy. I quickly shoved everything back inside the compartment except the binder. The office door handle moved. Locked. Someone tried again. Harder, then silence. Karen held her breath. A shadow appeared beneath the door. It didn't move. Whoever was outside was just standing there, listening, watching. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps disappeared. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. Then Karen whispered, "They know." "Know what?" "Someone's been in this office." I looked back at the hidden compartment. There were still 2 unopened envelopes, the flash drives, the voice recorder. We had barely scratched the surface. But one thing had become painfully clear. My father hadn't been paranoid. He had been investigating, quietly, patiently, documenting everything. He knew he couldn't trust the board, he couldn't trust senior management, and judging by that photograph, he hadn't trusted my husband. The realization hit me like a freight train. If Ethan had been meeting with Diane and board members in secret for months, then every comforting hug, every promise, every "I'm doing this for us," had been a lie. I felt sick. Not just because of the betrayal, because I had defended him, over and over, to my father, to Karen, to anyone who had doubts. I had unknowingly helped the people trying to steal everything Dad had built. A tear rolled down my cheek. "I'm so sorry, Dad." My voice barely rose above a whisper. "I should have listened." I closed the hidden compartment and slipped the binder into my bag. The flash drives and recorder would have to wait. We couldn't risk staying any longer. As Karen and I quietly left the office, I glanced once more at my father's desk. The chair sat empty, facing the window where he used to watch the sunrise before every workday. For the first time since his death, I understood his final promise. He hadn't just wanted me to inherit the company. He wanted me to uncover the truth. And judging by the evidence hidden inside that old grandfather clock, the truth was far bigger, far darker than I had ever imagined. I used to believe loyalty was something you earned over time. Work hard, keep your word, treat people with respect. Do those 3 things long enough and people would stand beside you when life got difficult. That's what my father believed. It's what he taught me. But over the next 48 hours, I learned another lesson. Loyalty can be bought, and someone had been writing very large checks. I locked myself inside my father's old cabin in Evergreen, about 40 minutes outside Denver. Very few people even knew it existed. Dad bought it years before the company became successful. Whenever life became too noisy, he'd disappear there for a weekend with a fishing rod, a stack of history books, and absolutely no cell service. "This place reminds me who I was before money," he'd always say. Now, it had become my hiding place. Karen arrived just after sunset carrying 2 cardboard archive boxes. "You weren't followed." "I don't think so." "You don't think," she sighed. "I drove in circles for 20 minutes. "Good. You really believe someone's watching us?" I looked at the leather binder sitting on the kitchen table. "I don't know what to believe anymore." We spread everything across the dining table. The leather binder, the sealed envelopes. Dad's handwritten notes. A yellow legal pad, my laptop, 3 pots of coffee. Karen smiled sadly. "Your father would have approved. He would have complained the coffee wasn't strong enough." She laughed for just a moment. It felt like old times. Then I opened the second envelope. Inside was a printed spreadsheet, no title, just names, 27 of them, next to each name. A date, another column, numbers, another column, one word, approved. "What is this?" I whispered. Karen leaned closer. "I've seen some of these names." I recognized several immediately. Regional managers, purchasing supervisors, human resources, accounting, operations. People who'd worked at Hayes Industrial Supply for years, others I'd barely met. At the very top of the page in Dad's handwriting were 4 words written in red ink. "They answer to her." A chill ran down my spine. "Her!" Karen didn't have to ask. We both knew. Diane, I opened Dad's notebook. Each page contained observations, no assumptions. No guesses, just facts. March 4, Jason Reed rejected Madison's proposal after meeting privately with Diane. April 19, board vote changed overnight. 3 members reversed positions after dinner at Diane's house. May 2, accounting delayed financial reports until Ethan reviewed them first. June 11, security cameras disconnected outside executive offices for exactly 27 minutes. 27 minutes, just long enough for someone to enter an office, copy files, leave. Without leaving evidence, my pulse quickened. Dad hadn't been collecting random information, he'd been building a case. Karen suddenly gasped, "Madison!" "What?" She pointed at one name, Linda Torres. "No." Linda managed payroll. She'd attended my bridal shower. She cried at my mother's funeral. She'd knitted a baby blanket for Ethan's sister. She wasn't just an employee, she was practically family. "There has to be some mistake." Karen quietly shook her head. "Keep reading." Beside Linda's name was another handwritten note. Personal loan paid anonymously. 6 months later, she approved unauthorized executive bonuses. I stared at the words. Anonymous loan, unauthorized bonuses. My stomach twisted. People don't just become corrupt overnight. Karen's voice was almost a whisper. They become desperate first. I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She sighed deeply. "I've worked here 28 years. She folded her hands together. "I know people's stories." She pointed toward another name. Tom Becker, warehouse supervisor. He had a son diagnosed with leukemia. I remembered. Dad had personally covered some medical expenses. Karen nodded. Then someone else paid the rest. "Deanne, I don't know." Another page. "Angela Morris, our purchasing director. Her husband lost everything during the recession." Another page. "David Lang. He almost lost his house." Another. "Nicole Sanders. Her mother needed expensive nursing care." I slowly understood. This wasn't random. It wasn't about money alone. Diane had studied people, their fears, their weaknesses, their impossible situations. Then, she became the hero. I sat back in my chair. "Oh my God." Karen looked at me. She wasn't buying employees. No, I swallowed hard. She was buying gratitude. Dad had written another sentence underneath the list. "Never underestimate someone who makes people feel indebted." His words echoed inside my head. Diane never demanded loyalty. She earned it, or at least. People believed she had. She paid medical bills, helped with mortgages, found scholarships, donated to churches, sponsored youth baseball teams. Everyone thought she was unbelievably generous. Maybe she was, just not for the reasons anyone imagined. The third envelope contained photographs, dozens of them, dinner parties, charity galas, golf tournaments, birthday celebrations. At first glance, they looked completely harmless. Then Karen noticed something. "Look closer." Every photograph contained at least one company employee, usually more, always smiling beside Diane. Always, it wasn't coincidence. It was networking, relationship building, influence. Dad had circled the same faces over and over, 27 employees, the exact same 27 names from the spreadsheet. My phone suddenly vibrated. Ethan, for the 8th time that day. I ignored it. Another call, ignored. Then a text. "Where are you?" Nothing. Another message. "People are asking questions." Another, "The board meeting is tomorrow." Board meeting? Nobody had informed me. I showed Karen. "They're moving fast." I nodded. "Too fast." Then another message arrived, not from Ethan. "Unknown number. Stop looking into Frank's files." I froze. Karen read it over my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. Another message appeared almost immediately. "Some truths destroy families." The room suddenly felt colder. I looked toward the cabin windows, dark, silent. Trees swaying in the wind. Someone knew, somehow. Someone knew exactly what I was doing. Karen whispered, "Delete it." No. I took screenshots, forwarded everything to a new encrypted email account, then powered my phone completely off. If they're watching my phone, they already know where we are. I know. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. Were we already too late? Around midnight, I finally opened one of the flash drives. It contained thousands of scanned company documents. Contracts, invoices, board minutes, executive expense reports, everything carefully organized into folders. Dad had spent months collecting this, maybe longer. One folder immediately caught my attention. Consulting. I clicked. Only one company appeared repeatedly. Silvercrest Strategic Advisors. I'd never heard of it. The invoices totaled over $4.8 million during the last 3 years. "Karen," she looked up. "Do we use consultants?" "Sometimes." "Nearly $5 million worth." Her eyes widened. "No." I opened the company profile. The business address belonged to a small office building in downtown Denver. The registered owner. My breath caught. Not Diane, not Ethan. A woman named Rebecca Collins. Who's Rebecca Collins? Karen frowned. Then her face turned white. Oh no, what? That's Diane's maiden name. I blinked. No, she never changed it legally after her divorce. The room fell silent. The consulting company receiving millions from Hayes Industrial Supply belonged to my mother-in-law, hidden in plain sight. Ha ha ha! A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Karen looked startled. I couldn't help it. It wasn't happiness. It was disbelief. The kind of laugh that comes when reality becomes too absurd to process. My father was right. I laughed again, shaking my head. She wasn't stealing the company. My voice cracked. She'd already started stealing the money. Tears filled my eyes. And with them came something new, not grief, not fear, anger, the kind my father rarely showed, the kind that stayed calm, focused, patient for the first time since Dad died. I wasn't thinking about surviving, I was thinking about fighting back. Just as I closed the laptop, headlights swept across the cabin windows. Karen's face drained of color. We're not expecting anyone. No. The engine outside shut off. A car door opened. Then another. Crunch, crunch, footsteps on gravel. Slow. Deliberate, someone walked onto the front porch. A knock echoed through the cabin. 3 slow taps, not loud, not aggressive, almost polite. Karen reached for my arm. Neither of us moved. Then a familiar voice drifted through the wooden door. Soft, sweet, calm. Madison! My heart stopped. I know you're in there, sweetheart. Diane. She laughed gently, as though she were stopping by for afternoon tea instead of showing up uninvited at a secluded mountain cabin after midnight. I just want to talk. I looked at Karen. Karen looked at me, and for the first time, we both realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it had become a war. The knocking continued. 3 slow taps, then silence, 3 more, like she had all the time in the world. Karen stood frozen beside the kitchen table, gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Diane's voice floated through the door again. Madison! Warm, gentle. Almost motherly. I brought coffee. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Ha ha ha! The sound echoed through the cabin. Karen looked at me. She's insane. No, I whispered. She's confident. There was a difference. People like Diane didn't bluff unless they already believed they were winning. She knocked again. I know you're hurting. Silence. I loved Frank too. My jaw clenched. No, she didn't get to say his name. Not anymore. Then she added something that made my blood run cold. You found his notes, didn't you? Karen gasped. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. How could she possibly know? Neither of us had told anyone. Neither of us had left the cabin. My eyes slowly drifted toward my laptop, toward my phone, toward the flash drives scattered across the table. Someone had talked, or someone was watching us much more closely than I'd imagined. I motioned for Karen to stay quiet. The cabin lights were off except for the lamp above the dining table. Maybe Diane couldn't actually see us. Maybe she was guessing. Then, a flashlight beam swept across the front window. Not random. Slow. Searching, she was looking inside. Madison! Her voice remained calm. You don't have to do this alone. I almost opened the door, almost. For one brief second, years of family dinners, birthdays, and holidays came rushing back. Then I remembered the email. Let him believe that a little longer. That wasn't family. That was strategy. I stepped closer to the door but kept it locked. What do you want? A smile entered her voice. There you are. What do you want? I want to help. You've helped enough. A pause. Then she sighed dramatically. I know you're upset. Upset? I couldn't stop myself. My father is dead. I know. My husband's been lying to me. I know. My company is disappearing. I know. And you think I'm just upset? Silence. Then, I think you're grieving. No, my voice became surprisingly steady. I'm waking up. Another long pause, when Diane spoke again. The warmth had faded, only slightly, just enough for me to notice. Frank spent his whole life protecting that company. Yes, but businesses change. I laughed again. Ha ha ha, that's your excuse. You don't understand everything. I understand enough. You've only seen pieces. I've seen your emails. Nothing. I've seen the consulting contracts. Still nothing, finally. I wondered how long it would take. There it was, no denial, no outrage, no surprise, just acceptance, as though she'd expected this conversation eventually. You really think you built all of this by yourself? She asked quietly. My father did. No, she almost sounded amused. Your father built the foundation. I gripped the doorknob harder. I built what came after. My stomach dropped. She actually believed it. She genuinely believed Hayes Industrial Supply belonged to her. Karen whispered, "Don't answer her." I nodded. Then Diane spoke one last time. "You'll understand eventually." Footsteps. The porch creaked. A car door closed. Engine started. Headlights disappeared down the mountain road. Neither of us moved for nearly 5 minutes. Finally, Karen whispered, "She's not scared." "No." I looked down at the binder. "She doesn't think I can prove anything." The next morning, I drove straight to Denver, not home, to Richard Lawson's office. Dad's attorney looked exhausted. When his assistant announced my name, he came into the lobby himself. "Madison, I need answers." He closed his office door behind us. "What kind of answers?" I placed copies of Diane's emails on his desk. His face lost all color. "Where did you get these?" "So they're real." He rubbed his forehead. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He stared out the window for several seconds, then quietly said, "Your father hired private investigators." "I know, you know. I found his files." Richard closed his eyes. "Oh, Frank, you knew." His silence answered the question. "You knew all along." "I knew he suspected financial misconduct." "And you never told me." "I couldn't." "Why?" "Attorney-client privilege." I slammed my hand onto his desk. "My father was trying to protect me. He was trying to protect the company." "No," I shook my head. "He knew those were the same thing." Richard opened a drawer, pulled out a sealed envelope. He stared at it for a long moment before sliding it across the desk. "He left this with me." I looked down. My name was written across the front, in Dad's handwriting. When was I supposed to receive this? If he confirmed his suspicions. And did he? Richard's voice barely rose above a whisper. "He died before he could." My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Madison, if Richard gives you this letter, it means I ran out of time. Tears blurred the ink. Don't let grief make your decisions. Facts, evidence, patience. Those 3 things win every battle." I smiled through tears. That was Dad, always practical, always calm. And I reached the last paragraph. "There is one person you must never negotiate with." My pulse quickened. I read the next line. "Diane already believes she owns what belongs to you." I looked up slowly. Richard couldn't meet my eyes. "How long?" "What?" "How long did Dad suspect Diane?" He hesitated. "Almost 2 years." 2 years. My father had carried that burden alone. 2 years of pretending everything was normal. 2 years of smiling through family dinners. 2 years of watching people betray him. I suddenly understood why he'd looked so tired during his last birthday. As I walked toward my car, my phone buzzed. It had been powered off since the cabin. Now dozens of missed calls flooded the screen. Most were from Ethan. One voicemail. I pressed play. "Madison." His voice sounded strained. "We need to talk." A long pause. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." Harder, I frowned. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "I had no choice." No choice. People always said that after making a choice. I drove home for the first time in nearly a week. The house looked exactly the same. White porch, blue shutters, fresh flowers by the mailbox, the life I'd built or thought I'd built. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed a large envelope tucked beneath the welcome mat. No postage, no return address, just my name. I picked it up. My stomach tightened. Inside, legal documents. The first page carried bold black letters across the top. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." I stared at the words. Again and again, my vision blurred. Ethan wanted a divorce, not after months of counseling, not after long conversations, not after trying to fix anything. He'd filed while my father was dying. The filing date made me feel physically sick. 3 days before Dad's funeral. 3 days, while I was sleeping beside a hospital bed, while I was holding my father's hand, while I believed my husband was protecting our future. He had been hearing attorneys. I turned the page. There was a request for temporary possession of several marital assets, then another page, then another. Suddenly, a familiar name appeared. "Hayes Industrial Supply Executive Equity Interests." "What?" I whispered. My breathing became shallow. Ethan wasn't just divorcing me. He was trying to claim part of my father's company through the divorce, even though it had always been my family's business. Even though Dad had founded it decades before I ever met Ethan. A cold realization settled over me. The divorce wasn't revenge. It wasn't heartbreak. It was another business strategy. I stood alone on the front porch, the papers trembling in my hands. The wind carried dried leaves across the driveway. Everything around me looked exactly as it always had, but nothing was the same. I looked up at the house where Ethan and I had planned our future, our first Christmas tree. Anniversary dinners, our dreams of raising children. Every memory suddenly felt borrowed. Every promise sounded rehearsed. Every kiss became a question. A single tear slid down my cheek. I wiped it away before it could fall. No more. I whispered it to the empty yard. No more tears. I folded the divorce papers carefully, placed them back into the envelope. Then I looked toward the setting sun. Dad, my voice was steady for the first time since his death. You told me to fight with facts. A small smile touched my face. I think it's time they learned I was listening. Far across town, in a boardroom I could no longer enter freely, people were probably celebrating. They believed I was grieving, broken, alone, exactly where they wanted me. They had no idea that the divorce papers they left on my doorstep had just become the biggest mistake of their lives. The morning after I received the divorce papers, I stopped crying, not because the pain had disappeared, because something inside me had changed. Grief had carried me this far. Now, determination took over. Dad had always said, when emotions get loud, let the numbers do the talking. So I stopped chasing people. I started chasing money. Money doesn't have feelings. It doesn't lie. It always leaves footprints. At 7 o'clock that morning, Karen met me at a small diner just outside downtown Denver. It was one of Dad's favorite places. The waitress still remembered exactly how he liked his breakfast. Coffee, she smiled sadly. The extra strong kind, I nodded, just like Dad. She reached over and squeezed my shoulder. We miss him. Those 4 words almost made me cry again. Instead, I smiled. So do I. Karen spread several folders across the booth. I couldn't take everything. You took enough. I hope so. Inside were payroll reports, executive expense summaries, vendor payment histories, board reimbursement forms, nothing dramatic, just paperwork. The kind most people ignore. Dad never ignored paperwork. Neither would I. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Richard Lawson. Madison, I was just about to call you. I've been thinking. About? The divorce. What about it? It's moving unusually fast. I frowned. How fast? Ethan's attorneys requested emergency hearings. So, that's uncommon. Why? They're in a hurry. I looked at Karen. She already knew. They want something. Richard continued. I think they're trying to finalize asset control before something changes. What changes? He hesitated. Before you discover something. That sentence stayed with me all day. Before you discover something. What hadn't I discovered yet? Around noon, Karen and I rented a small office downtown under a temporary business name. No company signs, no public listing, no connection to Hayes Industrial Supply. If someone was watching us, I wanted them looking somewhere else. By evening, every wall was covered with printed documents, invoices, organization charts, photographs, emails, bank transfers. Colored strings connected names like something out of a detective movie. I stepped back. Ha ha ha! Karen looked over. What? My father would have made fun of us. She smiled. He would have said we're watching too many crime shows. We both laughed. It felt strange, almost guilty, but for a few seconds, the fear loosened its grip. Then I noticed something odd. Every major payment to Deanne's consulting company occurred within 48 hours of a board meeting. Every single one. I circled the dates. Meeting, payment, meeting, payment, meeting, payment. Karen leaned closer. That's impossible. No, I whispered. It's planned. I opened another spreadsheet. Travel reimbursements. Most looked ordinary. Flights, hotels, rental cars. Then one line caught my attention. Private executive retreat, Aspen cost, $186,000. What executive retreat? Karen frowned. There wasn't one. Are you sure? I handle executive calendars. No retreat. No, I highlighted the payment. Then where did the money go? 3 hours later. We found out. Hidden inside another flash drive was a folder labeled simply, Retreat Photos. There were no executives skiing. No conferences, no presentations. Instead, photographs from a luxury mountain resort. Deanne, Ethan, 5 board members, champagne, expensive dinners, spa appointments, shopping trips, nobody else. It wasn't a retreat. It was a vacation paid for by my father's company, my father's employees, my father's life's work. I slammed the laptop shut. They stole from him. Karen nodded. They stole while he was still alive. That hurt more than anything. Not because of the money, because Dad trusted those people. He attended their children's weddings. He visited them in hospitals. He loaned them money without interest. And they thanked him by paying for vacations behind his back. That evening, another unexpected visitor arrived. Not Diane, not Ethan. A man in his late 60s wearing jeans, work boots, and an old Hayes Industrial Supply jacket. His name was Walter Brooks. Dad's very first employee. He had retired 3 years earlier. Karen let him inside. Walter removed his cap. I heard you were asking questions. I am. He looked around the room at the documents, the photographs, the strings connecting names, his eyes filled with sadness. Frank knew. You knew too, he nodded slowly. I just didn't know how bad. I offered him coffee. He declined, then reached into his jacket pocket. I've carried this around for almost a year. He handed me a small USB drive. What is it? I installed the security cameras in the executive hallway 15 years ago. I looked at him. There was always one camera nobody remembered. Karen's eyes widened. The old maintenance camera. Walter smiled sadly. Exactly. It still worked. They forgot about it. My pulse quickened. What does it show? Walter looked directly at me. The night your father's office was searched. The room fell silent. I immediately plugged the drive into my laptop. One video file. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. 8 months before Dad died. The grainy black and white footage showed the executive hallway, completely empty. Then, an elevator door opened. 3 people stepped out. Ethan, Deanne, a board member named Jason Reed. My breathing stopped. They looked around carefully. Jason unlocked Dad's office. The 3 disappeared inside. 26 minutes later, they came back out. Ethan carried a banker's box. Jason carried 2 binders. Deanne held a thick envelope against her chest. Before leaving, she paused, turned toward the hallway, smiled, not at anyone, just smiled as though she'd already won. The timestamp matched perfectly, 26 minutes. Dad's notebook had said 27. He'd been off by 1 minute. He'd been so close. I leaned back in my chair. Nobody spoke. Walter finally broke the silence. Frank asked me one question before I retired. What? Walter. His voice cracked as he imitated Dad. If I disappear, will somebody still tell Madison the truth? Tears filled my eyes instantly. Walter looked away. I promised him. Before anyone could say another word, Karen's phone rang. She answered. Her face turned white. What? Another pause. No. She slowly lowered the phone. What happened? I asked. The board. My heartbeat quickened. What about them? She swallowed hard. They just voted. Voted on what? She looked at me with tears in her eyes. They removed your name from every executive committee. The room spun. What? You no longer have access to company finances. No, they've suspended your corporate credentials. I stood so quickly my chair crashed backward. They can't. They already did, Walter whispered. They're finishing the takeover. I looked around the room at the evidence covering every wall, the emails, the payments, the photographs, the security footage, the hidden notebook. The flash drives. Then I understood. This wasn't panic, it was desperation. They knew time was running out, which meant we were getting closer, much closer. My phone buzzed, one new email from Ethan. The subject line contained only 6 words. Sign the divorce today, no greeting, no explanation, just one sentence in the body. It's the last chance you'll have to walk away peacefully. I read it twice, then smiled. Not because I was happy, because for the first time, Ethan had made a mistake. Threats leave evidence, and evidence wins cases. I forwarded the email to 3 separate secure accounts, then looked at Karen and Walter. They think I'm cornered. Walter smiled for the first time that evening. Frank would have liked what comes next. I nodded slowly. So would I outside. Rain began pounding against the office windows. Thunder rolled across the Denver skyline. Somewhere across the city, Diane and Ethan were probably celebrating another victory. They believed they had taken everything from me. My father, my marriage, my company, my future. They were wrong, because hidden inside a forgotten security camera and buried beneath years of carefully disguised financial records was enough evidence to destroy everything they had built on lies, and I was finally ready to use it. 3 days later, I walked back into Hayes Industrial Supply for the first time since the board had stripped away my executive authority. The building looked exactly as it always had. The polished glass entrance reflected the bright Colorado morning. The American flag outside fluttered gently in the breeze. Employees carried coffee cups through the lobby. Delivery trucks rolled into the loading docks. Business looked normal, too normal. As Dad used to say, the biggest storms often arrive under blue skis. I adjusted my navy blue blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The receptionist, Emily, looked up. Her smile appeared automatically. Then she realized who I was. The smile disappeared. Good morning, Ms. Hayes. It used to be good morning, Madison. She lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, I smiled gently. It's okay. No, it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than ever. Every ding echoed through my chest. When the doors opened, conversations stopped almost instantly. Executives looked away. Assistants suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. Someone quietly closed an office door. Fear. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. They were afraid of being seen talking to me. Karen was waiting near the conference room. "They're all here." "The whole board," she nodded. "And Diane." Karen's expression answered before her words did. "She arrived an hour ago." "Of course she did," I smiled bitterly. "The woman without a job always seems to have perfect attendance." Karen almost laughed, almost. The massive conference room doors were closed. Beyond them, I could hear muffled voices. Then Ethan's voice, confident, calm, exactly the same voice that had once whispered wedding vows to me. Funny how voices don't change, only the meaning behind them. I pushed the doors open. Silence. Every head turned toward me. 12 people sat around the polished walnut table. 11 of them looked uncomfortable. One looked amused. Diane, she sat beside Ethan as though she belonged there. No company badge, no title, no invitation visible, yet nobody questioned her presence. I slowly looked around the room. I didn't realize this company had elected a new board member. No one answered. Diane smiled. I was simply observing. Ha ha ha. A quiet laugh escaped me. "You're very busy for someone who's only observing." Ethan stood. "Madison, this meeting is restricted." "I know. You no longer have executive clearance." "I know. So why are you here?" I looked directly into his eyes. "Because my last name is still Hayes." Silence. "My father built this company." Still silence. "And until a court tells me otherwise." I slowly placed both hands on the conference table. "I belong here." Jason Reed cleared his throat. "We're trying to move forward." "Forward?" I turned toward him. "You mean without me? Business has to continue." "It certainly does." I reached into my briefcase. "And today," I placed a thick folder onto the table. "So will the truth." Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. The room suddenly felt smaller. I opened the folder. The first document slid across the table toward Jason. A payment authorization. Another toward Linda. Executive bonuses. Another toward the chief financial officer. Consulting invoices. Each person received one page, one piece of evidence, one reminder. I watched their expressions change. Confusion, recognition, panic. Diane remained perfectly calm. "You've been busy." "I learned from the best." She smiled politely. "I'm not sure what you think those papers prove." "Oh, they don't prove much." I reached into my briefcase again. "They're just introductions." I connected my laptop to the conference room's screen. The large monitor flickered to life. Security footage appeared. Timestamp. Date. Executive hallway. Jason stopped breathing. Ethan's face lost all color. Diane didn't move. The video began playing. 3 people walked toward Dad's office. Jason, Ethan, Diane, nobody in the room spoke. 26 silent minutes later, the 3 walked back out carrying company files. I paused the video, exactly on the frame where Diane smiled toward the camera. I turned around. "Anyone care to explain why a woman with no employment contract was removing confidential corporate documents from my father's office after midnight?" Silence. Heavy, painful, beautiful silence. Jason stood abruptly. "I want legal counsel present." I nodded. "I think that's an excellent idea." He looked surprised. "So do I." Then something unexpected happened. Linda Torres started crying, not quietly, not politely. She buried her face in her hands. "I didn't know." The words came between sobs. "I swear." "I didn't know." The room shifted. People looked at her, then at Diane, then back at Linda. "What didn't you know?" I asked softly. Linda looked shattered. "I thought." She struggled to breathe. "I thought Diane was protecting the company." Diane's eyes narrowed for the first time, just slightly. "You don't need to explain yourself, Linda." "I do." Linda stood. Her legs shook so badly she had to grab the table. "You told us Frank wanted to retire." Diane remained silent. "You said Madison wasn't ready." Silence. "You said Ethan was the only person capable of saving the company." Another silence. Linda looked directly at me. "I'm so sorry." The room felt frozen, one by one. Other faces changed, not everyone, but enough to matter. David Lang stared at the consulting invoices. Angela Morris slowly lowered her eyes. Another board member quietly removed his glasses. Nobody looked confident anymore. The illusion had cracked. Then Diane finally stood. She buttoned her cream-colored jacket, smiled, and slowly walked toward the screen. "You've worked very hard." I didn't answer. She turned to everyone else. "Do you know what I see?" Nobody spoke. "I see a grieving daughter." She looked back at me. "A woman desperately trying to blame someone for losing her father." I clenched my jaw. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the room, trying to win them back. "You've all known me for years." Heads nodded. I've helped your families. More nods. I've stood beside you during your hardest moments. She paused perfectly. Does any of this? She gestured toward my laptop. Change who I am. The room became uncertain again. I could actually feel her pulling people back toward her. Dad had been right. She didn't control people with fear. She controlled them with gratitude. Then, a voice came from the doorway. No. Everyone turned. Walter Brooks, behind him. Another retired employee, then another. Then another. Within seconds, nearly 20 former employees quietly entered the conference room. Men and women who had worked beside my father for decades. Warehouse managers, drivers, supervisors, mechanics, people Diane had never managed to replace. Walter stepped forward. It doesn't change who you are. He looked directly at Diane. It reveals who you've always been. The room went completely silent. Walter placed an old ledger book on the conference table. I kept copies. Diane's confident smile finally disappeared. What copies? Walter opened the ledger. Every unauthorized inventory transfer you approved 15 years ago. He turned another page. Every personal reimbursement. Another page. Every company donation redirected through your private foundation. Karen gasped. I stared at Walter. You've had this all this time, he nodded. I promised Frank I'd never throw it away. For the first time since all of this began, I saw fear, real fear. Not in Ethan, not in Jason. In Diane, she looked at the ledger. Then at Walter. Then at me. She finally understood. Dad hadn't been investigating alone. He had quietly built an army of people who believed in the truth more than they feared losing their jobs. People who had waited, watched, remembered. And now, they were stepping forward, one after another. The balance of power inside the room shifted so suddenly it almost felt physical. The people who had whispered behind closed doors were finally speaking. The people who had stayed silent were finally finding their voices. Diane looked around the table. For the first time in years, nobody rushed to defend her. Not even Ethan. I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The man who had promised to stand beside me forever couldn't even stand beside his own mother now. Outside the conference room windows, dark clouds rolled over the Denver skyline. Thunder echoed in the distance. Inside, the storm had already arrived, and this time, it wasn't coming for me, it was coming for them. The room stayed silent for so long that I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Every second felt like another crack spreading through the empire Diane had spent years building. No one spoke. No one moved. 20 years of carefully crafted lies were beginning to collapse under the weight of one simple thing. The truth. Diane was the first to recover. Of course she was. She straightened the sleeves of her cream-colored blazer as if nothing had happened. Then she smiled. Not the warm smile everyone loved. Not the motherly smile she wore at Christmas dinners. This one was different. Cold, calculated. You've all become very emotional. I almost laughed. Ha ha ha. She still thought she could control the room. She still believed this was just another conversation she could steer. Walter folded his arms. No, Diane. His voice was calm. Finally stopped being emotional. He pointed toward the evidence spread across the table. Those are facts. Jason Reed suddenly pushed his chair back. This meeting is over. No, I looked directly at him. It's just getting started. He grabbed his briefcase. I have another appointment. You mean with your attorney? His face turned pale. I slid another folder across the table. Before you leave, he didn't touch it. You should probably read page 7. His hands trembled as he opened it. The color drained from his face. What? It contains the wire transfer from Hayes Industrial Supply. I flipped another page. To Silvercrest Strategic Advisors. Another page. Followed 2 hours later by a transfer into your personal investment account. The room exploded with whispers. Jason looked around desperately. I can explain. I'd love to hear it. It wasn't. He glanced toward Diane. What it looks like. I smiled sadly. That's the problem. It looks exactly like what it is. Across the table, Linda Torres broke down completely. She stood up so suddenly her chair tipped backward. I quit. Everyone turned toward her. I can't do this anymore. She wiped away tears with shaking hands. I knew things were changing. She looked at me. But I convinced myself, her voice cracked, that your father would have approved. I slowly stood. No, she nodded, crying harder. I know now. She removed her company ID badge, placed it on the conference table, then looked at the rest of the executives. We all knew something wasn't right. Silence. We were just too afraid to ask questions. One sentence. That was all it took. Silence shattered. Angela Morris spoke next. I questioned the consulting invoices. Another executive nodded. I asked why Diane attended confidential meetings. Someone else whispered, I thought Ethan had board approval. Another voice, I never saw the paperwork. Then another. And nobody wanted to challenge Diane. Suddenly everyone was talking at once. The room became chaos, people interrupting each other, old conversations resurfacing, forgotten meetings, hidden instructions, missing files. The carefully maintained illusion was breaking apart in real time. Only Ethan remained silent. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded together, his wedding ring still on his finger. I stared at it for several seconds, funny after everything. He hadn't taken it off. I walked around the table until I stood beside him. Look at me. Nothing. Ethan, slowly. He raised his eyes. They looked exhausted. Not guilty, not angry, just empty. Did you ever love me? The question escaped before I could stop it. The room became silent again. Everyone waited. Even Diane, even Walter, even Karen. Ethan swallowed. I did. His eyes filled with tears. I still do. I laughed quietly. Ha ha ha. It hurt more than crying. You filed for divorce while my father was dying. I know. You tried to take part of his company. I know. You lied to me for years. I know. So tell me. My voice shook. When exactly were you planning to stop loving me? He closed his eyes. I never wanted this. Then why, for the first time, he looked toward his mother, Diane. She stood motionless, watching, waiting. His voice barely came out. I couldn't say no. The words hung in the air. Diane finally spoke. Ethan, just one word, a warning. He looked at her, then at me, then back at the floor. I was 26. Nobody moved. My father had just died. His breathing became uneven. We were drowning in debt. I frowned. What? My mom told me. He wiped his eyes. That Hayes Industrial Supply was the only way we'd ever survive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She told you to marry me. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. I felt as though someone had punched me in the chest. Our first date, our engagement, our wedding. The honeymoon in Hawaii, the anniversary trips, the late-night conversations, the promises. Every memory flashed through my mind. Had any of it been real? Or had I simply been? The assignment, tears blurred my vision. You used me. No, he shook his head desperately. It started that way. Those words destroyed whatever remained of my heart. But then I fell in love with you. I laughed again. The sound echoed through the room. Ha ha ha. It was heartbreaking, almost unbearable. You expect me to believe that. It's true. After 11 years, I tried to stop. When? So many times. Name one. He couldn't because there wasn't one. Love without action is just another lie. Diane stepped forward. That's enough. I turned toward her. No, she looked at Ethan. You don't owe anyone explanations. I smiled bitterly. There it is. She frowned. What? You still think you're in charge. Just then, the conference room doors burst open. 3 people entered, 2 men in dark suits, 1 woman carrying a leather case. They weren't employees. Richard Lawson walked in behind them, every eye turned toward him. Richard. He looked directly at me. I apologize for being late. Then he looked at the board. I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing the evidence Ms. Hayes provided. Nobody spoke. He nodded toward the 2 men. These are forensic accountants retained on behalf of the Hayes Family Trust. The room became deadly quiet. Richard continued. They've confirmed approximately. He opened a folder. $23,418,000 in unauthorized transfers, inflated consulting fees, fraudulent reimbursements, and concealed executive compensation. Someone gasped. Another person whispered, "Oh my God." $23 million. The number felt impossible. Richard looked toward Diane. The evidence indicates these transactions span nearly 8 years. 8 years. She hadn't just stolen my father's company. She had been bleeding it dry, little by little. Year after year, while smiling across our Thanksgiving table, while hugging me on Christmas morning, while telling everyone, family comes first. Diane finally stopped smiling, completely. She looked around the room. Nobody defended her. Nobody looked at her. The board members who once hung on her every word now stared at the documents in front of them. Jason looked sick. Linda was still crying. Ethan couldn't lift his head, for the first time in nearly a decade. Diane Collins stood completely alone. She looked at me, really looked at me. I underestimated you. I nodded slowly. Actually, I remembered Dad's words, facts, evidence, patience. You underestimated my father. Outside, rain hammered against the conference room windows. Lightning flashed across the Denver skyline. The lights flickered once, then steadied, just like me. For weeks, I had been surviving one heartbreak after another. My father's death, my husband's betrayal. The theft of our company. Now, standing in the very boardroom where they thought they had erased me, I realized something. They had taken almost everything. But they had failed to take the one thing my father spent 35 years teaching me, the courage to keep standing. And tomorrow, the fight for Hayes Industrial Supply would move from the boardroom into a courtroom, where lies don't get a vote. 6 months later, I stood outside the Denver County Courthouse just before sunrise. The same city that had watched my father build Hayes Industrial Supply from a one-truck operation into one of the most respected industrial suppliers in the Rocky Mountain region, was now watching his legacy fight for its life. The courthouse steps were already crowded. Reporters adjusted cameras. Employees gathered in small groups. Retired workers stood shoulder to shoulder with young warehouse associates. Some held coffee. Some held photographs of my father. One older driver wore the same faded Hayes Industrial Supply jacket he'd worn for nearly 20 years. Nobody had organized them. Nobody had asked them to come. They came because Frank Hayes had once believed in them, and now they believed in him. I looked up at the morning sky. "Dad," I whispered, "I hope you're watching." The courtroom felt colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, because everything inside was built for facts, not emotions. No amount of crying could change a document. No heartbreaking speech could erase a bank transfer. No charming smile could rewrite 8 years of financial records. Dad would have loved that. Richard Lawson sat beside me. His briefcase contained enough evidence to fill an entire shelf. Bank records, forensic accounting reports, security footage, emails, witness statements, corporate resolutions. Every page represented another piece of my father's voice. I hadn't lived long enough to finish the investigation, so I was finishing it for him. Richard leaned toward me. "Nervous," I smiled softly. "Terrified." "Good," I looked at him. "Why is that good?" "Because people who aren't nervous usually think they already know the outcome." I nodded. Dad would have said something similar across the courtroom. Diane sat perfectly composed, dark navy suit, pearl necklace, hair flawless. Anyone walking in late would have assumed she was the victim. Beside her sat Ethan. He looked nothing like the man I'd married. His shoulders slumped. His beard had grown uneven. Dark circles framed his eyes. He hadn't looked at me once. Not yet. The hearing lasted 4 days. 4 exhausting days. Experts testified. Former employees came forward. Bank executives explained hidden transfers. Technology specialists authenticated emails. The forgotten security camera footage was played in full. Every minute, every frame, nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. By the end of the 3rd day, even Diane's attorneys had stopped pretending the documents were fabricated. Their argument changed completely. They no longer claimed the money hadn't moved. Instead, they argued it had been authorized. Then Walter Brooks testified, 72 years old, hands rough from decades of honest work. He walked slowly to the witness stand carrying the old leather ledger, the same one he'd protected for 15 years. The judge asked him a simple question. "Why did you keep these records?" Walter looked toward me, then toward the courtroom. Finally, he smiled. "Because Frank Hayes once saved my family's farm." Silence. "I asked him how I could ever repay him." Walter's voice cracked. "He told me." A tear rolled down his cheek. "Just tell the truth when it matters." The courtroom became so quiet you could hear pages turning. "So I did." Karen testified next. She described hidden meetings, locked offices, changed security codes, unauthorized executive directives. When she finished, she looked directly at Diane. "I spent 28 years working for Frank Hayes." Her voice remained steady. "I've never regretted a single day." Then she paused. "I only regret staying silent for so long." On the final afternoon, the judge looked directly at Diane. "Mrs. Collins," the title sounded strangely formal now, "the evidence presented establishes a consistent pattern of concealed financial activity, conflicts of interest, and breaches of fiduciary duty extending over multiple years." No smile, no warmth, just truth, he continued. "Accordingly," my heart pounded, "all unauthorized consulting agreements are declared void." Richard squeezed my arm. The judge kept reading. "All executive appointments arising from those agreements are immediately suspended." Another sentence. "The board of directors is ordered to reinstate the lawful corporate succession plan pending final restructuring." I closed my eyes. "Dad, we did it." Then came the final sentence. "Ms. Madison Hayes is recognized as the lawful chief executive officer of Hayes Industrial Supply." For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even cry. Then the tears came all at once. Not the tears of grief, the tears of coming home outside the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Microphones reached toward me. One reporter called out, "Ms. Hayes," I stopped. "What does today's victory mean to you?" I looked at the crowd, employees, friends, retirees, neighbors, people Dad had spent a lifetime serving. Then I answered, "It isn't a victory." The reporters looked confused. "It's a promise kept." I smiled through tears. My father believed that a company doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to every family that depends on it. So today, I looked toward the Hayes employees standing together. We're simply bringing it back home. Applause spread through the crowd. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. Exactly the kind Dad would have appreciated. The weeks that followed changed everything. The old board resigned. Several members cooperated with investigators. Others faced criminal charges. Silvercrest Strategic Advisors was dissolved. Every dollar that could legally be recovered was returned to the company. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to save Hayes Industrial Supply. Enough to protect hundreds of jobs. Enough to honor the man who had built it. As for Diane, she left the courthouse alone. No reporters followed her. No employees thanked her. No board members stood beside her. The woman who had spent years collecting loyal followers discovered something money could never buy. Respect. She had mistaken fear for respect, gratitude for loyalty, control for love, and in the end, she lost all three. Ethan asked to meet me one last time. We met at the small park where he'd proposed 11 years earlier. The same oak tree still stood beside the lake. Children laughed in the distance. Life had continued without asking either of us for permission. He looked older, not because of time, because of regret. "I'm sorry." I believed he meant it. That was the tragedy. Sometimes apologies arrive only after they've become useless. "I know. I loved you," I nodded. "I think a part of you did." He lowered his head. "I wish I had chosen differently." "So do I." We sat in silence. Finally, he slipped his wedding ring off, placed it gently on the bench between us. "I don't deserve to keep this." I looked at it for a long moment, then pushed it back toward him. "No," he looked surprised. "Keep it." "Why?" "So every time you see it." I stood. "Remember the price of choosing the wrong person." I walked away without looking back. Some endings don't need another conversation. 1 year later, the annual Hayes Industrial Supply Employee Picnic returned for the first time since my father's death. More than 600 people attended. Children ran across the grass. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Laughter filled the air. The company finally sounded alive again. Near the entrance stood a bronze bench overlooking the warehouse. A new memorial. Simple, exactly how Dad would have wanted it. The plaque read, "Frank Hayes, founder, leader, father." Integrity isn't what you say when people are watching, it's what you choose when nobody is. I sat beside the bench just before sunset. The breeze carried the familiar smell of fresh-cut lumber and machine oil. For a second, I could almost hear him. "Morning, Maddie." A tear escaped despite my smile. "I did it, Dad." The wind rustled through the trees. Maybe it was only the breeze. Maybe it was my imagination. Or maybe some promises echo long after the people who made them are gone. I often think about everything that happened. People ask whether I hate Diane, whether I hate Ethan. The answer surprises them. No, hate would have chained me to the worst chapter of my life. Instead, I chose something my father practiced every day. Truth, accountability, and moving forward. Because revenge might satisfy your anger for a moment. Justice protects everyone who comes after you. That became my mission. Every new employee now attends a leadership program named after Frank Hayes. Every executive signs one simple pledge before accepting a promotion. No title is more important than integrity. The hidden grandfather clock still stands in my office. I never repaired the secret compartment. Sometimes, late in the evening, after everyone has gone home, I open it and read my father's letter again. Not because I need the evidence anymore, but because I never want to forget the lesson he left behind. The greatest inheritance my father ever gave me wasn't a company. It wasn't money. It wasn't a title. It was the courage to stand alone when standing alone was the only way to protect what mattered. My name is Madison Hayes. I'm 35 years old. I lost my father. I lost my marriage. I almost lost my family's company. But I found something even more valuable, the truth. And no one, no matter how powerful, will ever take that away from me again. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me about the door that opened for you. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.